It was supposed to be the happiest week of her year. Janice hummed softly under her breath as she flipped the calendar on her office desk to Friday. Only 5 more days until the trip she had spent months planning, their long-overdue vacation to the coast. For years, she and her husband, Sean, had talked about escaping the daily grind, sipping cocktails by the ocean, leaving behind their busy schedules and endless responsibilities. And now, it was finally happening. Every lunch break for the past 2 months had been spent scouring travel blogs, comparing resorts, reading restaurant reviews. She had even surprised Sean with matching swimsuits and had secretly booked a sunset dinner cruise for their anniversary night. This trip wasn't just a getaway. It was her way of rekindling the spark in their marriage, of reminding him why they fell in love in the first place. That evening, Janice walked home with a spring in her step, her heart light. She imagined Sean's smile when she told him about the last-minute spa package she'd added to their itinerary. She pictured them walking barefoot along the shore, leaving footprints in the sand as the waves lapped at their ankles. But the moment she opened the door to their apartment, everything inside her dropped. The lights were dim. The apartment was too quiet, eerily so. No smell of dinner cooking, no music playing like Sean usually had when he worked late on his laptop. And there, by the door, was Sean's suitcase, neatly packed, zipped up, ready to go. He stood in the kitchen, swirling a glass of wine in his hand, dressed casually but polished, as if he wasn't waiting for her, but preparing to leave. "Hey, sweetheart," she greeted, her voice bright but uncertain. "What's going on? Are we leaving early?" Sean barely glanced at her. His eyes were distant, guarded. "We need to talk," he said flatly. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. Janice's smile faltered as she slipped off her coat and moved closer. "Talk about what? You're scaring me." Sean exhaled heavily, as if her presence alone was a burden. He took a sip of wine, avoiding her gaze. "I've been thinking, I need some time to myself. I think I'm depressed." The words hit her like a slap. "What? Depressed? Sean, what are you talking about? We're about to go on vacation. You've been fine. We've been fine." He shook his head slowly, swirling the wine in his glass. "You don't understand. You have your work, your friends. You're always busy. Me? I feel like I'm stuck." Her chest tightened. "That's why we planned this trip, so you could relax. We've both been stressed, but we're supposed to do this together." Sean's jaw clenched. "Already booked my flight." Janice blinked, confused. "What do you mean? Our flight is next week. I booked it weeks ago." He finally looked her in the eye, his expression cold. "Not that flight. I booked my own. For tonight." The air seemed to leave the room. Janice's voice trembled. "What are you saying?" He shrugged like it was nothing. "I need space, Janice. Time away from everything." Her eyes darted to the coffee table, where a folded piece of paper lay. Something about it caught her attention, a bank statement. Her heart sank as she unfolded it, scanning the numbers. All of their savings. Every cent they had put aside for the vacation. Gone. Transferred to Sean's personal account. Her throat closed up. "Sean, what is this? You emptied our account." He didn't flinch. "I needed to secure my own plans." Janice's knees felt weak. She gripped the edge of the table, her mind spinning. "This was our money," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "We saved for this trip together. For years." Sean shrugged, as if she were being unreasonable. "I'm the one who's been holding everything together. I deserve a break." Her eyes stung. "Then take your half. Leave me mine. I'll figure out something." Sean shook his head, almost laughing bitterly. "You don't get it. I can't divide it. I don't know how long I'll be gone. What if I run out? I need security." Janice stared at him, struggling to breathe. "You're leaving me with nothing." He drained the rest of his wine, then stood, brushing past her like she was invisible. "You'll be fine. You always are." And then she saw it, his phone lighting up on the counter, a message preview glowing on the screen. "I'm already at the airport, babe. Call me when you get here." Janice's entire body went cold. The realization hit her like a freight train. This wasn't about depression. This wasn't about needing space. He wasn't leaving to find himself. He was leaving to be with someone else. Janice couldn't feel her legs as she stared at the message glowing on Sean's phone screen. Her entire world seemed to collapse into those simple, careless words. "I'm already at the airport, babe." Call me when you get here. Her stomach twisted violently. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to shake him and demand an explanation. But she knew the truth was already staring her in the face. He wasn't just leaving her. He was running away with someone else. Her chest tightened painfully, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt like she couldn't breathe, like the air had been sucked out of the apartment. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and keys and bolted out the door. Her pulse roared in her ears as she hailed the first cab she could find. To the airport, she said breathlessly, "Please, fast." The ride felt endless. Every second stretched like an eternity. Her mind raced, trying to piece everything together. The late nights, the distant stares, the unexplained absences. The signs had been there, right in front of her, and she had ignored them because she had wanted so desperately to believe in the man she married. By the time the cab pulled up to the bustling terminal, her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She stepped inside, her eyes darting through the crowd. Travelers hurried past, lost in their own worlds, completely unaware that hers was falling apart. And then she saw him. Sean stood near the security checkpoint, casually checking his phone, suitcase by his side. But he wasn't alone. A young woman clung to his arm, her glossy hair falling over her shoulder as she laughed at something he whispered. She looked carefree, radiant, a complete contrast to the exhaustion etched on Janice's face after years of holding everything together. For a moment, Janice couldn't move. She felt like a ghost, invisible and forgotten, watching the man she had built her life around treat another woman like she was the center of his universe. Her throat tightened painfully. This wasn't a bad dream. This was her reality. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. Instead, she turned and walked away, the weight of betrayal pressing on her chest like a stone. Outside the airport, the night air was bitter and sharp against her skin, but Janice barely felt it. Her feet moved on autopilot, her mind numb. The city lights blurred, distant and cold, as if the entire world had shifted on its axis. She wandered aimlessly, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in, gone in an instant. Her mind replayed the years she had given to Sean like a cruel movie reel she couldn't turn off. How she had sacrificed her 20s working overtime shifts so that they could afford their first apartment. How she had skipped nights out with friends to cook his favorite meals after long days at the office. How she had stayed up late comforting him through the loss of his father, putting her grief aside to hold him together. And now he had taken everything and handed it to someone else without a second thought. A memory surfaced, unbidden, sharp like a blade. She saw herself in the hospital room years ago, holding Robert's frail, trembling hand, Sean's father, his voice rasping as he looked her in the eye. "You were never meant to settle, Janice. Don't forget that." At the time, she had smiled weakly, assuming he was delirious from medication. She hadn't understood what he meant. But now, his words echoed in her mind like a prophecy. She had settled, for less than she deserved, for a man who had never truly seen her worth. The realization cracked something open inside her. Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they weren't just from heartbreak. They were from anger, from exhaustion, from years she had spent bending herself out of shape to keep a man happy who had never once asked if she was happy too. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, drawing in a deep, shuddering breath. No more. She was done begging to be enough. Somewhere deep inside, past the numbness and the ache, a flicker of something stirred. Something fierce, something alive. She wasn't going to let this night define her. The night had grown colder, but Janice barely noticed. She walked without direction, the weight of the betrayal settling heavier with every step. Snow had begun to fall, soft and silent, dusting the empty streets like powdered sugar over a broken world. Each snowflake that landed on her coat felt like a tiny reminder of how alone she was. She didn't know how long she'd been walking. The city felt endless, unfamiliar, even though she had lived here for years. It felt like she was floating outside herself, watching her life unravel from a distance. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. A figure slumped against the side of a closed storefront, barely a shadow in the falling snow. His jacket was threadbare, pulled tight around him, but doing little to shield him from the bitter cold. His head hung low, his hands trembling in his lap. He looked like he was fading, piece by piece, into the concrete. For a moment, Janice hesitated. She had nothing left to give, not even to herself. But something inside her, some small spark that hadn't yet been extinguished, pushed her forward. She knelt beside him, her knees cold against the icy pavement. Without thinking, she dug into her coat pocket, pulling out the crumpled bill she had planned to use for snacks at the airport. A small amount, but it was all she had left. "Here," she said softly, her voice raw from hours of holding back tears. "Get something warm." The man lifted his head slowly. His eyes met hers, tired, hollow, and full of a sadness that mirrored her own. He didn't reach for the money. His fingers trembled too much to take it. Without another word, Janice stood and hurried into a nearby convenience store. She didn't know why she was doing this. Maybe because in that moment, she needed to save someone else to keep from falling apart herself. She returned minutes later, clutching a steaming cup of tea and a hot sandwich wrapped in foil. "Here," she said again, kneeling beside him. "Eat this, please." This time, he reached out slowly, as if the warmth in her voice was thawing something inside him. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice rough and barely audible. They sat there in silence as he ate, the snow continuing to fall around them like a fragile curtain separating them from the rest of the world. When he finished, he looked at her, really looked at her. "You didn't have to stop," he said quietly. Janice gave a sad smile, tucking her frozen hands into her sleeves. "Neither did you." A long pause stretched between them, two strangers bound by invisible scars. "Do you have anywhere to go?" she asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No." Janice looked down at her hands, still trembling, but not from the cold. For the first time that night, she felt like she had control over something, even if it was just this. She stood up, brushing the snow from her knees. "Come with me." The taxi driver eyed them suspiciously in the rearview mirror as Janice gave her address. She caught his glance and knew what he was thinking, a well-dressed woman, bringing home a stranger in the middle of the night. But she didn't care. She didn't have the energy to explain that it wasn't pity that had driven her to invite this man into her home. It was something deeper, a quiet understanding that both of them had reached the end of their ropes tonight. The ride was silent, save for the occasional rustle of fabric as the man beside her, Dylan, he had finally introduced himself, shifted uncomfortably in the seat, as if unused to the warmth of a car. When they arrived, Janice paid the driver and led Dylan up the stairs to her apartment, her fingers stiff with cold as she unlocked the door. The place felt different now. Emptier, quieter, stripped of the illusion she'd been clinging to for years. Inside, she motioned toward the bathroom. "There are clean towels in there, and a robe. Take your time." Dylan hesitated, looking at her like she might change her mind. But when she didn't, he nodded and disappeared inside. Janice busied herself in the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she prepared something simple. A bowl of soup, slices of bread, hot tea. She needed something to focus on, something that wasn't the hollow ache in her chest. When Dylan finally emerged, she almost didn't recognize him. The layers of grime and exhaustion had washed away, revealing sharp features, eyes that held both weariness and something deeper, something broken but still alive. "You look like a new person," she said softly. He gave her a small, hesitant smile. "My name's Dylan." "Janice," she replied, her voice catching slightly on her own name. For the first time that night, it felt like a beginning, not an ending. They sat down at the small dining table, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable, but fragile, like something delicate that might shatter at any moment. As Dylan ate slowly, savoring every bite like it was the first real meal he'd had in weeks, Janice felt something inside her shift. For the first time that night, she wasn't thinking about Sean or the money or the woman at the airport. She was thinking about the man sitting across from her, and how, somehow, in the middle of the worst night of her life. She wasn't alone anymore. The clock on the wall ticked softly as they sat across from each other, the faint sound almost deafening in the stillness. Janice's apartment felt warmer now, not because of the heater humming in the corner, but because for the first time that night, there was another human presence filling the empty space. Dylan ate slowly, methodically, as if every bite was a gift he wasn't sure he deserved. Janice watched him quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, trying to steady her nerves. Finally, she broke the silence. "What happened to you, Dylan?" she asked gently, her voice softer than it had been all night. "How did you end up out there?" Dylan didn't look up right away. His fingers tightened around the spoon, knuckles turning white. "I had a family," he said after a long pause, his voice low and gravelly. "A wife, a daughter." Janice's breath caught in her throat, but she said nothing, letting him continue. "There was a car accident," he continued, staring into the half-empty bowl as if he could fall into it. "I was driving. It was raining. The brakes failed. I tried to control the car, but..." His voice broke, and he swallowed hard before going on. "They didn't make it." A heavy silence settled between them, like the weight of all the years he had carried that grief on his shoulders. "I blamed myself," he said quietly. "I still do. After the funeral, I couldn't go back to work. I couldn't even walk past the playground without seeing her face. Everything reminded me of what I'd lost. So I walked away. From everything. My job. My house. My life." Janice felt her chest tighten painfully. His words hit her in a place she didn't know was still raw. Without thinking, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His fingers flinched under her touch, but he didn't pull away. "You didn't deserve to lose everything, Dylan," she said quietly. "You lost them, but you shouldn't have lost yourself too." For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he glanced up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since he started speaking. There was something there now, something fragile and human beneath the layers of grief and guilt. "And you?" he asked softly. "What's your story?" Janice hesitated, her throat tightening. But then, the words spilled out, halting at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. "My husband left me tonight," she whispered. "He took our vacation money and ran off with someone else." Dylan blinked, stunned. "Tonight," she nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I followed him to the airport. I saw them together." The words felt foreign even as she spoke them, like she was telling someone else's story. "I thought I'd fall apart," she said. "But then I saw you, and somehow, helping you was the first thing that made sense." Dylan looked at her for a long moment, then gave her the smallest, saddest smile. "You already did the hardest thing tonight, Janice." She frowned, confused. "What's that?" "You chose yourself." The night wore on, but neither of them seemed in a hurry to move. The apartment felt like a cocoon, quiet, warm, and fragile. Janice had expected awkwardness after sharing so much with a stranger, but instead, there was a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, someone had actually listened to her. Not out of obligation, not because they had to, but because they cared. Dylan leaned back slightly, his shoulders less tense than when he had first walked through her door. "You're stronger than you think, you know," he said softly, breaking the silence. Janice let out a dry laugh, wiping at the corner of her eye. "I don't feel strong. I feel hollow." He shook his head. "That's what strength feels like at first. Like you've been gutted. But means there's room now for something new." Her breath caught at his words. No one had ever told her that before. As the clock ticked past midnight, Janice stood and gathered their empty bowls, her movements slow and deliberate. "You should get some rest," she said quietly. "The couch isn't much, but it's clean." Dylan stood too, glancing around the apartment, the photos on the wall, the little decorations that hinted at a life she had tried to build. "Thank you," he said finally, "for everything." Janice met his gaze, and for the first time that night, she smiled, small, tired but real. "Good night, Dylan." He nodded, his expression softening. "Good night, Janice." That night, as she lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, the pain was still there, lingering like an old wound. But there was something else too. For the first time in a long, long while, she didn't feel alone. When Janice opened her eyes the next morning, for a brief, blissful second, she forgot. She forgot about the airport, the betrayal, the cold silence of her apartment. The sunlight streamed weakly through the curtains, casting soft patterns on the ceiling. It felt like any other morning, until the memories came flooding back. Her chest tightened as the weight of everything crashed down on her again. But this time, it felt different. Lighter somehow, less suffocating. She sat up slowly, glancing at the clock. Nearly 9 a.m. normally. By this hour, she would have been rushing to check emails, planning errands, or texting Sean about groceries. But today, there was no one to text. Her gaze drifted toward the living room. She expected to hear soft breathing, maybe see Dylan curled up awkwardly on the couch. But the couch was empty. Her stomach dropped slightly, not out of fear, but something else. Disappointment. She walked over quietly, her heart thudding in her chest. On the coffee table sat a folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, she picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was rough but careful. "Thank you for saving me when I'd forgotten how to save myself. Till we meet again. Dylan." Janice stared at the note for a long time, her fingers tracing the edges. She had spent the entire night expecting to wake up alone because Sean was gone, but she hadn't realized how much it would hurt to find Dylan gone too. Her heart felt hollow and full all at once. Maybe that night hadn't just been about losing her marriage. Maybe it had been about rediscovering herself. And maybe, just maybe, she hadn't seen the last of Dylan. 3 days later, Janice sat in a lawyer's office, her fingers loosely clasped in her lap as the divorce papers were slid across the polished mahogany desk. The room felt sterile, too bright, too formal, too clinical for something so personal. She had imagined this moment would shatter her, that she'd be choking back tears, unable to sign her name. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Relief. Liberation. The pen in her hand hovered over the dotted line for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. She thought of all the years she had spent trying to be enough. All the nights she stayed up late, making sure Sean's favorite shirt was ironed, or worrying about their mortgage, or sacrificing pieces of herself so he could shine. And now, here she was, reclaiming her own name on a sheet of paper. She signed. As she left the office, the air felt crisper, sharper, as if the world itself had shifted slightly. That afternoon, she went home and did something she'd been putting off for years. She changed the locks. She packed up the last of Sean's things, his books, his jackets, the framed photos she hadn't had the heart to take down. She dropped the box off at his sister's place without a word and walked away without looking back. Each step felt lighter, but despite everything, her thoughts kept drifting back to Dylan. She hadn't heard from him since that night. She wondered where he was, whether he had found shelter, or food, or even a reason to keep going. And deep down, she realized something that surprised her. She missed him, not because he had saved her, but because in a strange way, they had saved each other. The days turned into weeks. Janice poured herself into rebuilding her life, one small piece at a time. Therapy sessions helped her unravel the emotional knots she'd kept hidden for years. She began taking walks after work, trying new recipes, redecorating her apartment with soft colors and plants she had once believed she didn't have time to care for. She found solace in the quiet rituals of independence, boiling tea just for herself, dancing alone in the living room, rearranging bookshelves not for anyone else's approval, but because she liked it. But even as her world began to find a new rhythm, one thought lingered at the back of her mind. Dylan, was he safe? Did he have a place to sleep? Would she ever see him again? She told herself it had just been one night, a fleeting connection born of shared pain. But her heart wouldn't let it go so easily. Then, one ordinary evening, everything changed. She had just finished a late shift and was walking home through the dim city streets, her breath curling in the cold evening air. As she passed a small, cozy cafe tucked between two boutiques, something made her pause. It was the warmth that caught her attention first, the soft glow of string lights in the window, the hum of conversation, the gentle clinking of cups. Then she saw him. Behind the counter, handing change to a customer with a quiet smile. Dylan, her heart lurched. He looked different, clean-shaven, wearing a simple uniform, his hair brushed back, but it was the same gentle face, the same kind, weathered eyes. He looked alive. She froze, her breath catching in her throat as their eyes met through the glass. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world around them melted into a blur. Then Dylan smiled. Small, genuine, surprised. And Janice felt something inside her crack, wide open. Not with pain this time, but with relief. Janice pushed the door open, the warm scent of coffee and baked pastries wrapping around her like a familiar blanket. The bell above the door jingled softly. Dylan looked up as she stepped inside. His smile widened, though his eyes still held a trace of disbelief, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "Hey," he said quietly as she approached the counter. "Hey," she echoed, suddenly shy. You look good." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck, clearly a little nervous himself. "Yeah, well, turns out a hot shower and a steady paycheck make a big difference." Janice smiled, her chest swelling with something warm and real. "When did you start working here?" "Last week," he said. "The owner gave me a chance. Didn't ask too many questions. Just saw me, I guess." Janice nodded slowly, her voice soft. "I'm so happy for you." A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that only exists when two people have already seen each other at their worst. "Can I make you a coffee?" he asked, gesturing toward the espresso machine. "On the house." She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "I'd love that." As he worked behind the counter, carefully preparing her drink, Janice found herself watching his hands, the steady movements, the focus in his expression. This wasn't the lost man she had found in the snow. This was someone reclaiming his life. When he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed for a second longer than necessary. And in that small touch, everything unspoken passed between them. "I remember. I'm still here. You're not alone." They sat together for a few minutes at the corner table, sipping coffee and exchanging quiet stories. The conversation was light, but underneath, it was something deeper, an invisible thread pulling them closer. When Janice stood to leave, Dylan walked her to the door. "I'm glad you came in," he said softly. She smiled, the warmth of his words settling deep in her chest. "Me too." As she stepped back out into the cold, the snow beginning to fall again like it had that first night, she realized something profound. Maybe some strangers don't just pass through your life. Maybe they return, right when you need them most. The cafe became their quiet sanctuary. At first, it was small things. Janice would stop by after work, pretending she was just grabbing coffee, but Dylan always knew she'd linger a little longer. Sometimes they'd talk. Sometimes they'd just sit in silence, both savoring the stillness they hadn't known they needed. The weight of the past slowly stopped feeling like a chain around her ankles. Instead, it became something else, a scar she carried, but no longer something that defined her. One evening, as the sky outside turned a soft shade of indigo, the cafe lights casting a warm glow on the empty tables, Janice found herself sitting across from Dylan after closing time. He looked different now, not just because he had shaved, or because he had gained a little weight, or because the dark shadows under his eyes had faded. He looked alive. "I've been thinking about something," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. Janice glanced up from her cup, raising an eyebrow. "What's that?" Dylan's fingers tapped gently against the table, his gaze thoughtful. "I want to help people like me, people who fell through the cracks, who gave up on themselves because the world gave up on them first." Janice's heart swelled at the quiet conviction in his voice. "You'd be good at that," she said softly. "You already helped me without even trying." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "That night, I thought I was done. I didn't see a way back." He met her eyes, his voice quieter now. "But then you stopped." Janice swallowed hard, the memory of that cold, broken night still fresh in her chest. "I didn't stop to save you, Dylan. I stopped because I needed saving too." He shook his head gently. "Maybe, but we saved each other." The words hung between them like a fragile truth neither of them had dared to say out loud until now. And for the first time, Janice realized she was no longer afraid of the future. Months passed, but this time, Janice wasn't counting the days out of loneliness or longing. She moved forward, not because she wanted to forget, but because she wanted to live. Her divorce was finalized quietly. No drama, no final confrontation. Just a stack of papers and a signature that set her free. She redecorated her apartment, repainting the walls with soft tones she had always wanted but never dared to choose. She took herself out to dinner, bought herself flowers on Fridays, started reading the books she had left collecting dust on the shelf. And through it all, Dylan remained, a steady, quiet presence. What had started as small coffee shop conversations turned into late-night walks, long talks about fears and regrets, and fragile hopes. They laughed, cried, sat in silence together when words weren't enough. One evening, the first snow of the season began to fall. They walked side by side down the same streets where, months ago, they had first crossed paths, a broken woman and a forgotten man. But tonight felt different, lighter. Janice paused, tilting her face up toward the falling snowflakes. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to hate the snow." Dylan glanced at her, surprised. "Why?" "Because it always felt cold, lonely, like it was burying me." She turned to him, a soft smile playing at her lips. "But now it feels like a fresh start." Dylan reached out, taking her gloved hand gently in his. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just a quiet understanding. They had been lost, but now they were found, not because they had saved each other, but because they had chosen day by day to save themselves. And together, they would keep moving forward, not looking back, but looking toward everything beautiful and uncertain and new.